Hey, peace, everybody. Hey, everybody on Instagram. It is, I don't even know what day it is. Oh, Wednesday, April 2nd, 2025. I'm based in Albany, New York. Our guest today, Soffiyah Elijah, is in New York City, probably Brooklyn, maybe, right?
I'm actually now in the Bronx.
Oh, in the Bronx, even better. Bronx
I've
girl.
migrated.
Nice. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, so everything is crazy all the time. It gets worse and worse. Uh, since we didn't do the show the week before, everybody, I think, saw what happened to the sister that was basically kidnapped off the streets of Somerville, Massachusetts. And remember, Massachusetts is a quote liberal state, but I'll get
Mhm.
into that in a second. So thank you all for rocking with me. This show is sponsored by Cooperation Jackson. Please keep your eye on all the organizing Zooms that are happening in our series Build and Fight. And let's hope we can build to a general strike because, in my opinion, unless the country completely shuts down, it's not going to stop, you know? And as someone in higher ed my entire life, and my mentors, Dr. Gordon and Dr. Bracy and Dr. Turner, may they all rest in freedom. I know what they would want us to be doing right now. Absolutely. But I think we also have to acknowledge that everybody right now probably has to take care of themselves or the people that they work with. Organizations are losing funding. The attacks
Mhm.
on higher ed is going to increase. It'll be taking students out that are permanent residents or have K-1 visas. But I've been saying, I think we all know that there's going to be a very an attack on Black studies. They got to attack Black studies first because Black studies opened all the other quote ethnic studies, gender studies, even
Mhm.
religious studies. So you know they're basically trying to take away everything that a Professor Bill Strickland, Sonia Sanchez, again, Dr. Gordon, Lois Owens, Bracy, Dr. Shabazz, who's still he's still teaching, and a lot of my friends in higher ed are pretty miserable, but some people are coming to work and they're locked out. That's just happened
Mhm.
last week in Virginia. The state of Virginia struck down DEI. People went to work the next day. They were locked out. They couldn't use their key cards, and their stuff was already out there waiting for them. And for those that are not in higher ed, I think it's important for you all to understand as well that when Black Studies was created, it wasn't just the people who ended up going to school. It was part of a movement. And there were people who wanted to go to college and some people who stayed at that form of organizing. Or if you look at a lot of professors that started the programs, like Dr. Brace, Professor Bracy was part of the Black Detroit, I should remember the Revolutionary Workers of Detroit, Michigan. Dr. Turner
Mhm.
was in Northeastern teaching when Cornell University had one of it's an infamous takeover, which was only for 48 hours, and that's how strong. And I tell people, look at that picture. Students have guns. People want to have conversation about that. But I know that in 2 days, they got all those African American Puerto Rican students at that time got what they wanted. They recruited Dr. Turner, and he turned it into what I believe to be a world class Africana studies and research center. So it's
Mhm.
not like like people who are teaching also care about people who are working at a supermarket. Workers are under attack, and now they're coming after collective bargaining. I think we got to always understand history. And in fact, tomorrow will be the actual day that Fred Hampton Jr., Chairman Fred Hampton Jr., that was assassinated on December 4th, 1969, along with Mark Clark. Tomorrow will be the 57th year, but tomorrow is the day that Chairman Fred Hampton started the Rainbow Coalition, the Real Rainbow Coalition. So
Mhm.
that's why I tell everybody I love history. I don't think it repeats. I think it's on a continuum. So tonight I'm so happy to have also a mentor of mine, someone that I've looked up for decades, looked up to, and learned a lot from and still do. Soffiyah Elijah is the executive director of Alliance of Families for Justice, established in 2016 in New York. Its mission is to support families of incarcerated people and people with criminal records, empower them as advocates, and mobilize them to marshal their voting power to achieve systemic change. Prior to founding AFJ, Miss Elijah was the executive director of the Correctional Association of New York, where she was the first woman and the first person of color to lead the 170-year-old organization. Ms. Elijah has dedicated her life to human rights and social justice and is a frequent presenter at national and international forums on criminal justice policy and human rights issues. Prior to leading CANY, Ms. Elijah has served as Deputy Director and Clinical Instructor at the Criminal Justice Institute at Harvard Law School. Before moving to Harvard, she was a member of the faculty and director and supervising attorney of the Defender Clinic at the City University of New York School of Law. Ms. Elijah has also worked as a supervising attorney at the Neighborhood Defender Service of Harlem and a staff attorney at the Juvenile Rights Division of the Legal Aid Society and in private practice. And if you follow political prisoners, Sophia has always been there to guide us in those sense. And then I was thinking, so that's where I met you. It was at
Mhm.
Association. It was a brownstone. And the Drop the Rock campaign had just started. And then at that time in New York, you were all there as the leaders of this, but that's when like Prison Moratorium Project came about. Justice Committee was already there, but we had many a meeting around Drop the Rock. And for those that don't know what that is, it was called Rockefeller Law, Rockefeller drug laws, where people were sentenced 25 to life with no possibility of parole. And obviously, that's how we see also the upswing, and particularly African American Latino men and the prison population in New York State itself, and we won. And I think that's what I want people to understand. When we resist, we win, or as Chairman Fred always says, dare to struggle, dare to win. So Sophia, thank you so much for being with us. I have been very frustrated at this at a conversation that a lot of people, especially left or progressives, are saying the courts will handle that. And I'm like, for who and what? Like, we had to commend the Constitution to have women the right to vote, now Black women, white women, and then obviously 3/5 of a man that, we needed a constitutional amendment. So if we look at what people are saying, then if we believe in the laws and the courts, or if obviously there's radical organizing within all of you as lawyers, people's attorneys, what do you want us to think about first?
I think, first of all, thank you for having me on the show. I want to say that something similar to what I said to my students for years when I was teaching, which is we have to understand that sometimes the law is a tool for social change and sometimes it gets in the way. And what we have witnessed in the past, and I won't say the past 90 days because it's going back, the courts have been stacked so that there's a concept in the law called stare decisis, which basically means the decisions of the courts are going to follow the precedent that has been set over the course of history so that there's some predictability about rulings, etc. But when the courts have been stacked with people who no longer feel that stare decisis is something that they're required to adhere to, then there's no predictability, there's no dependability, and you really have created a lawless society. And that's one of the first steps. And then there's many other steps that have rapidly come into play along with that. So I don't think we can any longer say, well, the courts are going to take care of that, because the quote unquote taking care of that has been, seems like a mass surgery of removing people's spines, and folks are not sticking to what the law is supposed to be. And as a criminal defense lawyer and someone who's taught law for many, many years, I know there's many problems and flaws in the courts, but it was the one key piece of checks and balances of the three branches of government.
Right. And they have it all. So I think that's why people question, especially with Trump having immunity for past and present acts. So And then what we're seeing, they're just straight kidnapping people. They're going to
Mhm.
start with that, but then the next wave is going to be, as always, activists and artists. And
Mhm.
just alone, like,
Will
the
be
number
activists,
of social
artists,
workers who have lost
writers.
everything.
Yep. Yep.
Right.
There'll be people in the theater. If you think back to the McCarthy era, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, folks, McCarthy era, y'all should be knowing all about that because that's exactly where we're at. Except even him, he definitely ruined lives. But I'm like, was he kidnapping people off the streets? I mean, it's when something like that happens and the law does step in, but the government is saying it doesn't matter what you say.
Correct.
Do they keep? So do people are like, okay, we'll push another way on the legalities, or we'll eventually get a judge that's gonna enforce it. And how do you enforce that?
Well, there's two things. One, the judges, there's an increased likelihood the judge will be overruled in an appeal. There's that. And then, you know, even if all the courts were aligned to follow the law, there is the bodacious position, and I don't use that term too often, the bodacious position that the law doesn't matter.
Right.
That the law doesn't matter. We're going to do what we want to do. And I think we can expect that we're going to see a lot more of that. We should expect that we're going to see a lot more of that. If we don't expect we're going to see a lot more of that, then we are missing the reality of what's happening.
That's what I think we are missing. I mean,
Mm.
we know people are doing work, but it just seems it's like just so overwhelming every day. People to see that many people losing their jobs. And I I think we have to broaden that conversation. I'm like, we're not talking anymore about 10 or 20,000. We're talking about 2 to 300,000 people have lost their jobs.
Oh, and there'll be many more.
Many more, right? And
Mhm.
then that I didn't realize this, but those that took a severance package might not get a pension.
Mhm.
So the economic effect is, I mean, like, obviously capitalism is literally imploding right now, but workers and teachers, professors, lawyers, I mean, all of us are going to get hit, and our children, who knows what they're going to want to do with public schools next year or what other executive order.
They're going
But
to fold.
say that again.
So they're going to fold because so much public education is funded by federal tax dollars. And that brings me to a real fundamental question. For better or for worse, the order that we have experienced has been financed by federal tax dollars, right? And there was a certain degree of confidence that those dollars were going to be distributed in such a way that they address human needs, not adequately, even inadequately, some focus on human need. What we're witnessing is a complete gutting of that without any authority or um, approval by
Right.
the American public.
I mean, obviously, I'm not a Democrat. Folks know that. I have to say, though, to see Cory Booker do that, I'm like, yeah, please, somebody. Like, they shouldn't have even been at that address. They should have, like, they want to quote Congressman John Lewis about good trouble. I truly believe he would have been on the floor, like, right now. Like, if
Mhm.
we're going to be in here, your little signs or your TikTok videos, well, thousands and thousands of people are impacted, and then communities are impacted, and then there's going to come the time where they want to have whatever they view the version of law enforcement as they're testing out, just grabbing up Venezuelans, young people. I mean, it's like human trafficking. You're taking them here and then in El Salvador, and that's what the courts are saying. So it's gonna people. I guess it's gonna be the power of the people that are gonna have to enforce that by being out in these streets, millions and millions. It seems like it's like the energy is kind of shifting, and especially that Elon Musk has spent that much money in Wisconsin, and the Dems won. I was like, all right. But as grassroots organizers, what made you decide that you wanted you have this has been your life's work, that you wanted to start the Alliance of Families for Justice?
So what we know is mass incarceration disproportionately affects Black and Brown communities. Has since time, maybe not quite. Well, I'm going to say since time. It's what I would imagine for most of your audience is since time. So what was clear was it didn't just affect the people who were behind bars, but it affected the whole community, the families that they left behind, because families do time with their loved ones, and their needs and their suffering and their traumas completely ignored, as is this needs and suffering and trauma of the people who are behind bars. So about maybe 20 or so years ago, the discourse in the country around mass incarceration and the fact that the United States was the number one incarcerator in the world started to focus some on the fact that people were being vastly warehoused in prisons, and more focus started coming to the forefront about conditions inside prisons and that too many people were being locked up. Um, and they were all good discussions, but they all focused on the people who were serving the time who've been convicted. There was no focus on the family members who were trying to keep their loved ones inside afloat and who had to provide a place for them to come back home to, and the impact on those communities and the extended family, because Black and Brown communities are not insular nuclear families by and large. All right, you've got the neighbors who become the cousins. You have, so it's a much larger extended family that is affected by incarceration. So my focus was to create something where there wasn't anything. There was no place for family members to turn. And what Alliance of Families for Justice provides is a holistic wraparound system
Yeah.
to first address people's needs and provide them with support, then the tools where they can be the advocates and organizers for themselves, mobilize, and get out there and hit the streets.
Yeah, and this is incredibly important. And as you say, wraparound services. So it's reentry support, legal support, advocacy, and communication skills training, and then
Mhm.
voting rights. The reentry to me is always been, I think, in other spaces or movements, people don't talk about that. People are like, let's just get them out. I'm like, and where are they going to live?
When they
And
talk about a job and housing, right?
yeah,
But they don't talk about the emotional, spiritual attempt to reconnect with a family. Even if your family was visiting you every week, that is I don't want to say contrived, that's not the right word. It's not a normal arrangement. The person who's the visitor has all the control over whether or not that relationship continues, whether you get a visit, how long they're
right.
going to be there, what day they come. The person who's incarcerated has no control over that. Then they come home, and now you're trying to establish some kind of equality in that relationship, some kind of balance in that relationship. And it's fraught with difficulty. And so we work with family members to help them understand and navigate and get prepared before someone comes home so that things don't just completely fall apart when their loved one comes home. For the person coming home and for the people who've been waiting for them to come home.
Yeah, I never thought about it that way. Especially maybe if you, a child who is obviously going to be maybe happy that their dad or mom came back, but they might not,
They
they
may
might
be happy, but they're not used to that person
like being
being
part
the authority figure
of
in their life
authority. Yeah,
because someone else played that role or
right.
didn't, right? Or it could be the same with a spouse or even a sibling,
Hmm.
grandma. And there's major family disruption when someone goes to prison. And helping people, the family members who've been waiting and the person coming home, they all need support. We just
Yeah.
had a whole day healing retreat in
Mhm.
Central Harlem from 10 to 6. We're packed with people who came from all over to get some healing.
Yeah, I mean, I literally never thought of it like that. And then it also shows the need for that,
Mhm.
and then with legal support, they might still be on probation, have to be right. Like,
You could be
what?
on parole when you come out of prison, but for
Yeah,
a family member, your visits might be suspended or terminated. And you don't have any legal recourse. You don't have any place to turn if you don't have money to hire a private attorney. And I can assure you, private attorneys have no knowledge of this area of the law. So we're the one place where family members can turn for legal support and advocacy on their behalf.
And it seems too with advocacy and communication skills training that eventually some folks will gravitate towards becoming advocates, activists, and telling their story and narratives.
Oh, the majority of our family members land right on that platform.
Perfect.
And
Yeah.
and they are pretty impressive. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm very, very excited and proud of what they have accomplished.
So in New York State, we're seeing prisons close. Can you talk about that process a little bit of, because you've been part of it? I don't know if you could touch on Rikers. We had Dana Kaplan on a couple weeks ago, and people
Okay.
have a lot of questions because people, I think, for the like someone like something like Rikers has been so ingrained and also in like imagery and media, and people don't understand it's like an island, but there's 8 other jails in there. But have you, when there are prisons that are going to have to close up here soon?
So yeah, let's talk about that. But if you have a moment, I have to give a little background. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I'm primarily going to talk about the state prison system versus the city jail system. Okay. And part of the reason I want to focus on the state prison system is because the city jail system, which is kind of iconically known as like Rikers Island, but there's more than just Rikers Island, has been a political football for way too long in the city. And I could get into that, and I've been involved in some of the closed Rikers work, but I want to talk about the state system for a very particular reason. At the height of the Rockefeller drug laws, the state prison population went up to like 72,000 people behind bars in state facilities. That population dropped down to just about 30,000 in 15 years, in the past 15 years. Okay? Crime rate dropped by 40%. Those are not Soffiyah's numbers, those are law enforcement numbers. Okay. So when the prison population dropped, different governors started closing prisons. Right? This prison guards union is a very powerful union in this state, NYSCOBA. Okay. And so they started creating this narrative that there was this hyper violent person behind bars that required a higher staff to population ratio. And it was all a narrative to preserve their jobs. Because if the prison population dropped by more than half, then arguably the staffing needed to drop by more than half, and you didn't need as many facilities. So when prison started being closed, right, there were, if my memory serves me correctly, over 8,000 empty beds. But they never closed 8,000 empty beds. They shut down less than half of those beds. And that was in response to the narrative that was pushed heavily by NYSCOBA. So if you fast forward to what just happened in the past couple of months when the prison guards went out on wildcat strike, that was not about their work conditions. It was about job preservation.
Right.
It was all about job preservation. Okay. And so you saw the governor of the state keep threatening to fire them, but not firing them over and over and over and over again, even though they were engaged in a completely illegal, non-debatable strike. So all that to say, right, there are several more prisons that could be closed because the population is still low. But what you find in New York City, and now I'm going to circle back to New York City, the main area that people who are incarcerated in the state system come from is New York City. Okay. Well, various reentry and alternative to incarceration programs really proliferated in New York City in the past 15 years. And so you had far fewer people going to prison, right? There was a major pushback on stop and frisk, exposure about police brutality. And then what happened a couple of years ago? You have someone who's a former police officer elected as the mayor, okay with stop and frisk, and the population has now started to go up.
Oh.
When the plan was put into place to close Rikers and
Mm-hmm.
move to a borough-based facility, the city jail population had dropped drastically. And so the plan for the new jail system was based on a much smaller population. But because the leadership and the administration in New York City pushed for tough on crime and it's okay with stop and frisk, the population in the city jail system has gone up such that the previous plan for a new jail system and the plans for how many beds were going to be has now been blown out of the water. So by default, they've destroyed what was a plan that would have worked for moving towards abolition and decarceration.
Oh. And I would guess too, with the legalization of weed, cannabis, they didn't have that as the first option because that's how I seen mad people get arrested in my time, like straight a joint or an open bottle.
A
Or
number of different
right?
efforts by advocates to cut back on putting people in cages started to get traction, right? And no longer was it a radical thing to talk about alternatives to incarceration. Judges welcomed it, okay? You even had prosecutors that say, find me a program this person can go into, and we won't lock them up.
So what is going to be the impact of the federal government on well, the federal government in general? What is going to be the impact, or we do you
You
do
mean in
people
New York City or across the country?
across the country?
Everybody should get their Excedrin.
Mm. So there's definitely a need to like scale up. But as it regards New York State, are there some prisons right now that there's a whatever, like we need to close A, B, C? Probably not
You can
Elmira,
start with Attica.
Attica, right?
You can start with Attica. And
Can
I'm
you
not
let
saying
people
Attica's
know?
the only
Yeah,
bad prison in the state, but
yeah,
it is notorious, not
right.
only in New York State, but across the country. So our organization has a campaign to shut down Attica, right? But
Yeah.
as one of our younger advocates said to me early on, Miss Sophia, what about Attica's cousins? We need to
Hmm.
shut them down too. I said, trust me, we plan to wipe out the whole family. We got to start someplace, okay?
Yeah.
All right, there's Attica, Clinton,
Clinton,
Auburn,
Sing
all
Sing,
right.
Elmira,
Oh yeah,
yeah.
there's a bunch of them. Okay.
Especially these Macs, like Clinton. I know people in,
In
but
this state, there's only one max that's been closed, and you know where it was?
mm-mm.
In Staten Island, the one place that it was relatively easy for folks in the city to be able to visit their loved ones.
Right,
And that's the one max that was been closed in the past 20 years.
yeah. And for people that might be watching, and like I'm always telling people, like New York City is not the state, and that
Correct.
people have to travel sometimes 11 hours on a bus.
Oh yeah, if
If
you're going up to Attica,
right on the yeah the
way
Canadian border,
the
you got
border of
to go in.
Western. Yeah, and then if you're going up to Clinton, if you're flying to Clinton, you're literally probably better off flying into Canada and then renting a car to drive back into New York
Yeah,
State to get to the closest airport.
and if you could do that, yeah, it's just so difficult.
Yeah.
Um, so in terms of around young people,
Mhm.
there have been some changes. The raise the age campaign, a couple other ones. Or is there something now? Is there something currently happening to young people that we need to be aware of? Or
I think we need to understand that in certain communities, stop and frisk never went away. And the presence of the military and higher police presence in the subway systems is all geared to targeting young Black and brown people.
mm,
That's really what it's about. Okay.
mm,
And I don't know. People who maybe don't ride the subways may not understand what I mean when I say the presence of the police. You
Yeah.
see literally the cops coming through the subway cars in groups of 4, okay, to remove someone who's homeless sleeping on the train. Now, the overwhelming majority of the homeless people sleeping on the train are in no position to physically be any threat to 4 cops, 4 armed cops. And then you go through Penn Station, Grand Central Station, you have people in fatigues with assault weapons.
Yeah. Terrible.
So
I
they
mean, they,
talk about violence on the subway. I'm
yeah,
concerned about the violence on the people in uniforms.
yeah. I mean, because they know they're going to get away with. I mean, but then it also is like, what's your analysis on the current mayor? And I don't even know how Cuomo could become the mayor, but I'm like, like this is a nightmare. But I mean, Adams obviously has never been a friend, but like his way of being is like he's basically like F y'all, like black people and Latinos. Like,
Mhm.
what has his presence been like for folks that are doing this type of work?
There's nothing that we have to turn to Eric Adams for as far as support. There's no expectations. I said a long time to people, he can't disappoint me.
Right.
He just, it's not possible. I have no expectations or hope of anything from him. And he hasn't let me down.
Yeah, his charges got dropped today. I guess
I know.
that meeting with Trump went really well because we
So
like
there's different analysis. I was reading an analysis today saying and the judge cited this in his opinion, that as long as those charges remained possible, that it gave actually Trump more control over what happened in New York City.
right.
Because so instead of dismissing without prejudice, you dismiss
Oh,
with
yeah,
prejudice. All right.
yeah.
Now, I mean, that's one analysis. It remains to be seen. I personally, and this is just Sophia speaking, this is not Sophia, Executive Director of the Alliance of Parents for Justice speaking. I personally don't think it's going to change anything in what Eric Adams does.
What could be the impact if I guess Stringer's running for Cuomo? Like, I guess we know that too if you're from New York State. Like he's
It's, I think you were capturing it earlier. It's a mess.
it's
Yeah.
yeah. So these two brothers, Robert Brooks
Mm-hmm.
and then Messiah not Nance Y. Messiah
Mm-hmm.
Nance. The one of Robert Brooks, we've had his attorney on twice.
Okay.
And we had her on the day of the indictments because I was like, what is happening? Because
Mm-hmm.
obviously like the prosecutor, the DA comes out. He's an older white man. I'm like, oh, he's gonna be like, nah. And then he's like, murder. And I was like, what? And then like 10. And I was telling him, right, I don't think that's ever happened in New York, but maybe has not even happened in the country, particularly maybe in Cali,
Mm-hmm.
maybe. But I mean, it being a small town too, that also depends on prison. They're already telling the DA, we're gonna get the union, we're gonna get you out of here. But what does
That's why they went on strike. They went on strike as soon as
soon
the
as
arraignments were to do. When the indictment was unsealed, they went on strike.
right? So what happens if does it would this change? Like they go through the whole process, they may be convicted. Will that change like a signal like y'all do that is not going to work, or is it going to be more like we're going to keep doing what we're doing
They're
because
going
they
to
were
keep doing what they're doing.
cameras. I thought they forgot the cameras were on.
They didn't know the cameras could be. They didn't know that there was like a default for
A
the
backup.
camera so that the company could see. Yeah, there's
That's what the
no
told.
audio, but
Yeah,
they had no idea that the cameras could work that way. But
and
here's the thing:
yeah,
during the strike, there's a significant number of guards who stayed at work. They put on assault uniforms and they went around beating the heck out of people. That's how Messiah got killed. That was
right.
during the strike. So while their brethren are out on the illegal picket line, the rest of them are inside wearing CERT uniforms, beating and killing people.
Yeah, That's what it was saying when this new article where his cellmate said he woke up from a nap to find not why crying. He was off his psychiatric medication, and
Hmm.
that cellmate said prison staff hadn't been giving him his normal medication. Right, because they were on strike, and then the National Guard that they sent in, the National Guard's like, we ain't here for that. We're just
That's
gonna make
correct.
sure they stay in their cell, they don't hurt anybody, and they get fed. So
Right.
probably other ones that we don't know about.
So
But
people weren't getting the right meds. They weren't getting meds at all.
yeah,
And I mean, what's the first thing that any doctor who administers psychotropics says? Stay on your meds.
right. Because when you stop, a lot of things happen. And then obviously again, the National Guard has no regard for him as a human. But as it
But
regards
the
women,
National Guard wasn't involved in beating him at all.
no, I'm saying the National Guard in general, like he didn't get his medication, like you said,
Oh
maybe.
yeah, and it wasn't their assignment to distribute
Right.
medication. That
Yeah.
was whatever prison staff was there, and
Yeah.
most of them were not there.
As it regards women,
Mhm.
is Bedford the only like maximum security prison for women in New
No,
York? It's
no,
small.
Bedford and Albion. Albion is up near Rochester. Bedford and Taconic, which is across the street, kind of across the street from Bedford, are both in the Hudson Valley. And Bedford is a max and Taconic is a medium.
What for women incarcerated? What's like the number one reason they are there? Is it maybe drug use or
There's
something?
drug use, some drug selling, some low-level crimes, sometimes tied to drug use. Some are tied up in drug conspiracies with their partners. Yeah, those are the main things. Some property crimes tied to bad check, fraudulent check writing.
Yeah.
Usually crimes of survival.
Oh, crimes of survival. Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
that's what I call check writing and boosting.
Right.
Those kinds of things are more crimes of survival.
And for juveniles, because of some of the changes that have been made in the state law, like particularly raise the age,
Mhm.
again, like what are we maybe not knowing? Or I'm assuming there's less young people that are incarcerated or
Yes, the
taken.
numbers have gone down.
Okay,
The numbers
yeah,
have gone down, but I will also say, which group of people fought the hardest against raise the age?
no,
The district attorneys across the state.
oh yeah. Mm.
And there's, like the prison guards union, the district attorneys union is pretty well, their association is pretty well organized. And so they've been lobbying different members of the state legislature to push back and roll back on raise the age in similar fashion as the guards are pushing back and lobbying legislators to destroy the HALT Act, which is designed to limit the illegal and inhumane practice of locking people up in solitary confinement and throwing away the key.
Yeah, and like there's been people in solitary confinement all over this country for decades, like 30, like for real decades,
Mm-hmm.
and there were these wins, but like you said, the district attorneys are now fighting them. There was a case.
Well, the
I
district attorneys are fighting on raise the age, and the prison guards union is fighting on HALT, the solitary confinement bill,
Okay.
on law.
So with the raise the age, his name is escaping me right now, but there's a young brother here who was like kind of, people would say, was the poster child for not having been incarcerated
Oh, you're talking
longer.
about Khalif Browder?
No, Khalid
No,
Brother. No,
you're
no,
not
it's
talking
a
about him.
here.
Okay.
Yeah, it was like a quality of life type of crime, but the DA wanted him to like serve like some crazy 10 or 15-year thing like that. But the raise the age thing had taken effect. But then
Okay.
what they did is what I realized now, going back to what the organization does, when he came out, there were no services for him
Mm-hmm.
and his mom. And I remember her being optimistically happy, and she's like, things may not go how everybody thinks.
Yeah.
I don't want to disappoint the community in it. Like, well, you don't disappoint the community. He shouldn't have been given or been trying to get 10 to 15,
Right.
you know,
Right.
years. But then they started using that like in changing the whole or trying, because I still think in New York State, most people would be like, no death penalty, you know,
Mhm.
support halt act, as well as support um the organization RAP, which is
Mhm.
release aging prisoners, because
Right. Release aging. Those release aging people from prison.
yeah, I mean, when you think about it, if someone's been in there for 30 or 40 years, now they're going to be like 70 or 80,
Hmm.
right? Now, is it that it's an inhumane system, they're not going to want to let anybody go? But if rap it continues to do what it does and is a model, will there be a significant change where, like, after a certain time, unless you're the highest level of what, a murderer or a life sentence like that, why won't they? Is it just more the optics? Like, we don't care if they're 75. Like, we're not letting them out.
Yeah. Well, it's even worse than that. It's even worse than that because it defies all of the research. See, there's been countless studies that have shown that as people get older, their involvement in any kind of illegal activity drops drastically, and their likelihood to engage in any recidivism drops also drastically. So that pivot point is sometime after actually age 40. All right. So by the time 50 and 60 turn around, then these folks present no risk to public safety or such a small percentage of a risk to public safety that there's no justifiable reason to continue to incarcerate them except sheer punishment. So it's not about rehabilitation at all. It's not about public safety. And those are the talking points that we use when we created RAP and push for the various bills that we've been trying to get passed. There's a fair parole bill, there's a second look bill, still haven't been passed in New York State. And it also defies logic because the Department of Corrections and Community Supervision doesn't have any place that's adequate for these people to be held. So they actually have hospice care inside the prisons. They have
That's,
people on life support chained to a hospital bed.
oh my God, that's, it's so inhumane.
That's correct.
Yeah, I mean, these systems, obviously, but at some point, it's like, really, is this where we're at in this country? Of course,
And then there's
um,
compassionate release. And
right?
there's so much bureaucracy tied to compassionate medical release that most people don't live long enough to get out.
Yeah, and we saw that happen with some of our political prisoners.
Hmm.
You know what happened to Matulu when he came out? You know,
Look what happened to Noah Washington.
yeah, Albert Noah.
Hmm.
I mean, you know, like Jalil is obviously out there, and we've had so many wins, but
Abdul Majid and Bashir,
yeah,
they both
Mumia,
inside.
yeah. There's two Move family members left. Am I wrong? I think there might be
No
two.
move people are incarcerated. All
Oh,
the move people are
all
out.
Move is okay.
Everybody's out. Yeah.
Yeah. So what advice would you give to people who want to be part of this work?
The first thing I would say is it's a noble cause to take up. They have to engage in self-care because it's not easy work and it's not a quick fix. So it kind of reminds me of when I was a teenager and I would hear folks in the Black Panther Party talk about protracted struggle. And I'd say, oh, that means it's going to take more than a year. I didn't realize it would take a lifetime.
Right.
So I think it's very important to understand that to bring about fundamental change, it means everybody rowing in the same direction at the same time, and don't give up and don't jump ship.
Yeah. It's that operational unity. We need that so bad right now. It's like
Yeah.
people, you know, the way they're coming, I mean, it's the United States federal government against its own people at some level, you know, kind of thing.
And
But
increasingly every day. Yeah. And that more and more people are starting to understand that that's what's happening. But it's like a blitz. It's a shock and awe approach.
So in like your experience, like growing up, being around movements, what what do you think is not getting across to people? To look at the macro of what's going on. The micro is so much, and it really requires, like, I'm sure you reading a paper, like I just keep taking notes, like what happened today, and I'm like, this is too much for folks that are engaged in this type of work that have
Mhm.
engendered some privilege that we could do this type of work. But what do you think is, how bad can it get?
It can get worse than it is. But I think one of the overarching things that people need to understand, what does it mean in any country when one of the first moves is to destroy public education? To say
Mm,
you can't teach history.
right.
A fundamental tenet is you're not going to know where you're going if you don't know where you've been. So you're going to dumb down the American public even worse than it is already, and to destroy public education. And you don't want people to know the true history of the country. That is the making of dictatorship. And I think we can look at, and we should look at, the mass firing of federal employees, the mass firing of federal employees who are engaged in the work of caring for people and
Yeah.
providing basic human needs and destroying education. If people are ignorant, then they don't know their rights and they're not able to fight back. And I say that very specifically because I want to talk just for a quick second. If you look at one of the first things that happened after the Cuban Revolution in 1959 was to rid the country of illiteracy so that the populace could read and know and understand what was going on. We have exactly the reverse happening in the United States.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's why, as a historian, someone in Black studies, I'm like, of course they go after history, the teachers, but we're like even past all of that now. So you got the teachers picking up people, the craziness of health and human services. Measles is now an outbreak. They're talking
Mhm.
about OSHA, like the people that make sure for the most part that our food is not going to kill us. And then I just saw this the other day. So now Florida, there's two state assembly members who are introducing a bill to not restrict, but to let loose child labor laws, because they're admitting now with the roundup and deportations, who's going to go and actually pick the food and give it to, like, I'm like, right, everything that the labor movement worked for,
Mhm.
they're saying no, they could be 14 and they could work at 8 p.m. to 6 a.m. and then go to school. I'm like, what school? They're not going to school. Like,
Well, they're
you know,
going to be school. They're not going to be school. They're gutting public
right.
education.
What you said. Exactly what you said. There's no right. So with the entire State Department of Education, maybe that's going to be the big like ripple effect. It won't happen fast, but maybe it will, because now with the tariffs, I tell people tariffs is a tax. Okay, like it's I don't know. You can't make sense out of a megalomaniac, but you can definitely at least be aware of things and understand why it is that they go after the truth first.
And that is why the education piece and the attempt to destroy education is so important. It's not just those of us who are alive today. This is plans for generations behind us.
Right.
Because if you remove literacy from children at this age, those children are going to have children. But if they're illiterate, what are they going to pass on to their children? And there's no public schools for those children to go to, and they can't rely on their parents to teach them. What are we going to end up with?
A collapse of society at some
Right,
level.
right.
Yeah. And that's why these are serious times. I think all people could do, if you're just starting to be an activist or an organizer, is you start locally. Like, because
You start
go,
locally, and you must study your history. You must study it because you
yeah,
will not. You're not going to get it in school. It's going to be illegal for a school to teach it.
teach it. Yeah. I mean, somebody the other day was like, y'all think there's really going to be elections? And I was like, maybe not. Like, because everything some of us have said, not just 5 people, but millions of other people that understand and seeing the attack on higher ed. The one thing about higher education that, I try to get across when I'm doing interviews is, listen, if they went after Columbia and Harvard, who have billion-dollar endowments,
Mm-hmm.
but yet, and now UPenn on transgender, they're going after the big ones.
That's
Like
correct.
next probably be UC Berkeley, Cornell. But then what's going to happen to community colleges? What's going to happen to smaller colleges?
And they're all dependent on federal dollars.
They're all dependent on federal dollars. Like again, Columbia could stand to lose $400 million. But also what we're seeing with Columbia
They
is
fold
for
it.
sure going to spread. And a lot of these presidents and chancellors and boards making their multi-million dollars are like, whatever, yeah, no free speech.
Well, and look, he's also going after major law firms.
Yeah, that one was, so folks, he's going after law firms that are quote democratic law firms. Like you need to basically bow to me if I'm going to give you any money. And if I give you money, it's to defend me and my staff. Or maybe, Elon Musk is the vice president. I don't know. It's
But did he get demoted?
probably by tomorrow because he spent all that money on the race and they still lost.
Yeah, it's we're not in a good place. But I will say, back to your question, it is so important for people to study their history. It's essential. You have to study the history because I think, as you said, it's not repeating itself. It's a continuum. You have to understand that trajectory.
Yeah. And, lastly, fam, I think, like I always say every time I do this show, like I definitely feel hopeless. We all have our moments, not anytime I'm just like, let me read like Assata Shakur or think about our political prisoners, think about like seeing Jalil and Oscar Lopez come out relatively well. And I'm like, don't y'all just want to chill? And they're like, we organize there and we're organizing out here. That's what we do. Right.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, right.
That's right.
And
That's
I
right.
think that, for me, it's always like, okay,
There's a living example of that kind of resolve, and that comes with a cost.
yes,
We can't romanticize that because it comes with a cost. It comes as a cost for them and for their families. Right?
a
It
huge
really
cost.
does. I'd be remiss if I didn't also lift up the fact that today is the anniversary of the case of the Panther 21 from
The case.
1969. Yeah.
I wonder, Daruba. Well, Daruba has his show. In fact, Daruba Benoit has a new book. I'm about to get it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was telling him, I said, and I tell younger folks that are watching, they ask how to be an organizer or activist. I would say I wasn't born in the movement. I was born in the Bronx. I didn't even know about the Black Panther Party, the Young Lords, and all that stuff. I didn't even know why I was an American citizen. I knew I was Puerto Rican. That was like, I'm a Boricua. I was raised from, but that like my daughter has been raised in the movement, and I think people have to figure out, you don't have to do 10 million things. You could do like one thing. You don't have to do something big every day, but you can do something. And that some people have it in them to be like hardcore on the ground organizers, and young people are doing that. And I wish we could even see some more of these stories of how even young people are pushing back in high schools and like the misinformation, pushing back on their parents and their teachers, which it goes back to what you said throughout the thing. You have to know your history and be part of a movement or not, and that things don't happen. Like political prisoners weren't released in a month. You're talking about
Tell me about it.
Year campaigns that then decades. And they're never going to come out. They're never going to, and they did. And that to me is, I think we have to be, anybody who's, a professor, teacher, and elder, like, you can't say all the bad and not show the resistance and how we win. But it takes, like you said at the beginning, the protracted struggle.
So we can't win if we don't fight.
Yeah. Well, I want to bring you back. I think, like, I learned so much today. Like, just the notes, putting it all into perspective, especially up here in Albany. Albany is a weird little place, but sometimes people come out and what we're beginning to see is protests happening um, uh, near Chuck Schumer and all that, even though that was done. But, I'm seeing younger people out here and young folks I wouldn't expect to be joining certain movements. So
There'll be more of it. There'll be more of it because they won't be in school.
Yeah, right. Again, school. And obviously their main concern, which I think a lot of young people around climate catastrophe. And I also got this DM about Greenpeace. So fam, Greenpeace is like the world renowned climate.
Been around a long time.
Been around forever. Yeah, they're like the behemoth of it. But they just lost the case of one of these oil pipelines. And the judge was like 1 billion dollars. And I'm like, that means Greenpeace is broke. Doesn't mean there's not other environmental groups. And yes, but young people really, for the most part, they put like climate catastrophe and now again, reproductive rights for women and then the attacks against transgender, but they also can multitask and understand prison systems. Because what ends up happening to the doctors that are going to be like, I'm still going to give this transgender youth their pills. If they want to come arrest me, and that's going to be. And they will. And people who stand like that know what's about to go down. But I'm so glad. Thank you for your time, Soffiyah Elijah.
Thanks for having me.
Always great. The organization is Alliance of Families for Justice. Everybody go check it out. Sign up. I'm going to have you back.
Okay. I'll gladly come back. Thank you.
Thank you so much for everything, Soffiyah, for everything you do for our people as well.
It's an honor.
Okay, everybody. Thank y'all. Hey, everybody. I learned so much. Did you I think this is one of my best interviews. What do y'all think? I know, YouTube, I see you. I think this is one of the dopest ones. DM me and let me know. Well, you were all here, so I see a lot of viewers. Yeah. Yeah, Soffiyah Elijah is a queen. Like, she's a G. I'm glad that she's been my mentor. All right. There's so many people. Thank you all for watching. Please share. I'll be back next week. Next week is going to be a special guest. Now, Shaka Kane, writer and director of Judas and the Black Messiah. Shaka brought me into the project. I was a historical consultant and an associate producer. If you haven't watched it, watch it. So, yeah. Everybody stay good out there. Crazy times. Stay cool. Hey, everybody on YouTube. Thank you so much for watching the show. Please like, share. I'll see you on next Wednesday. And again, our show is sponsored by Cooperation Jackson. Go and subscribe to the newsletter and join the Build and Fight formula, where it's a monthly discussion on one aspect of organizing. All right. Peace, everybody. Stay safe.